everybody. My name is David Plum. If you're with us yesterday, you'll know that I'm helping to run these meetings. If you weren't, welcome today. This is the second day of a 2-day session of meetings of the Maine Climate Council. Yesterday, we met from 9 to 12:30. We're going to have a similar time slot this morning. This will be a very similar agenda to what we did yesterday. The guts of this agenda are really about listening to and understanding the recommendations that have come out of the working groups. Today we have 3 working groups. As Hannah and Jerry mentioned yesterday, this is a heavy focus today on resilience, adaptation, although there are some strategies that we'll hear today about emissions reductions as well, about our natural working lands and about blue ocean and things like that. So we're going to jump right into the presentations this morning. We'll hear them back to back like we did yesterday. We're going to use the same tools we did today as yesterday and taking notes for ourselves. And then for the Climate Council members, we have that shared Google Doc, and Sophia can send that link in the chat again to the panelists of that shared Google Doc for taking notes. We'll then do a panel just like we did yesterday with the co-chairs and the folks who are leading up the technical and scientific subcommittee. We'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll do Q&A, and then we'll spend a little time on the next steps and what to expect this summer and going into the fall council meeting. So that's our agenda for today. We'll do a break in the middle as yesterday to give us a break from the screens. But let me turn it over to the co-chairs, Director Hannah Pingree and Commissioner Jerry Reed, just to give us a framing on the day.
Thanks, David, and welcome everybody. I thought yesterday was an incredible day for the Climate Council, the culmination of so much hard work on the part of the 3 working groups that presented. It was a huge success, and we were joking a few minutes ago about what a high bar it's set for today, but I have no doubt that today will be equally successful. So I'm looking forward to more great presentations and more thoughtful discussion. And on a day like today, I think it's really important that people not spend too much time out in the hot sun. So we're happy to provide a safe and healthy alternative to that until about noontime. And so looking forward to more great work presented today. And thank you for everybody for their efforts and participation. Anna?
Great, thank you, Jerry. And again, welcome to everybody who is here, all of our Climate Council members, our co-chairs, staff who've worked really hard to get us here today, as well as David said, in the participant list, there are many people. Again, we had 230 people participating in all of our working groups. So those are folks, again, who we want to really thank for stepping up and putting in so much time and effort to get us here today. As David said, we're going to hear from the 3 groups. The first one is the super group with such a long name that it's hard to remember it, but Community Resilience Planning, Public Health, and Emergency Management. We're going to hear from Coastal and Marine and Natural and Working Lands. And these are 3 groups who've done a really important and wonderful job sort of on both the how do we reduce carbon in some ways, but really focused on adaptation and resilience. Incredibly important issues when it comes to climate. Yesterday was all about mitigation. How do we reduce carbon emissions? A little bit of adaptation for transportation, but really a strong focus on reducing emissions. And today it's really about a much broader arena of how do we help communities who are going to grapple and are grappling with the impacts of climate, impacts on their economies, whether it's fishing or agriculture or forestry or tourism. And then really it's about people. And I know that when we kicked off the Climate Council effort last September, we heard from Gina McCarthy, the former Obama EPA secretary, and she just made a really strong point that when it comes to climate, we really need to remember this is about the human impacts. And so I know that's what these 3 groups have really thought about as they've done their work. How can we, through climate in the forest product sector, actually create jobs? How do we help fishing industry and communities who are going to struggle with changes in ocean temperature? How are we going to help our communities and our planners and our selectmen and who are really struggling with difficult decisions as they look at their waterfronts or flood-prone zones? So again, a huge thank you to the co-chairs who are about to present. They've done just put in so much time and effort. I won't name them by name, but I know some of them, when we asked them to step up and do this, probably had no idea the time and effort involved, but they've really all stepped up in a big way. So with that, again, thanks to so many people for tuning in, who again, as Jerry said, on a beautiful day, I'm sure folks have work and gardens and lives and kids. Making this a priority means a lot. So with that, I'll turn it back to David to get started.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Jerry. Just one quick thing before I turn it over to our first presentation. We have been taking notes of all this, and we have been capturing the big themes from yesterday. And I just want to give you a sense of what that might look like in this meeting summary that you'll be receiving from this. So from our very first conversation after Dr. Shaw spoke and Hannah and Jerry spoke about how are we attentive and how are we understanding our job in this moment, we've been capturing this and sort of really trying to do a synthesis of what you're saying. I'm showing this because I want to make sure everyone knows this is not like voices in the wind. This is, you all are saying things that are important that we need to capture, and we're trying to do our best to do it, and you'll see that on the back end of this. It's harder to do this in real time in digital space, so we're not going to be doing this in real time, but you'll be seeing this shortly. Okay, so let's dive into it. Again, back-to-back 3 presentations. I will say our first group really is 3 groups wrapped into one, and they valiantly said they can do it in 20 minutes, but we'll see how it goes. I said, feel free to take a little more if you need it, because it is a very powerful set of ideas and recommendations that really represent 3 groups that got merged into one. So without further ado, let me turn it over to the 3 co-chairs who led this group. And I'm not sure which one of you is going to kick it off, so I'll just say, go ahead, the floor is yours, and please introduce yourself as you get going. Thanks so much.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, David, so much. Since you said we get a little bit of extra time, I'll just go ahead and take a few moments to first extend just a sincere amount of appreciation, gratitude, and extend congratulations as well to everyone yesterday who did an exceptional job. You did indeed set the bar very high, so we'll do our best to live up to expectations today. So with that, good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Fuchs. I am the State Hazard Mitigation Officer with Maine Emergency Management Agency. I serve as one of the 3 co-chairs on the Community Resilience Planning, Public Health, and Emergency Management Working Group. I'm very fortunate to serve alongside co-chairs Judy East, who's the Executive Director of the Land Use Planning Commission. She can give you a wave if she likes. And also Rebecca Bolas, the Executive Director of Maine Public Health Association. I would also be remiss if I didn't actually mention our much loved Dr. Nirav Shah, who was with us for a great portion in the beginning of our climate meetings, and also Rebecca Lincoln from Maine CDC, who contributed an enormous amount to this discussion. As the supergroup, our group does maintain a total of 43 members, and this slide just allows us the opportunity to again just extend sincere gratitude to every member that has engaged in this conversation. It has at times been pretty intense, very time consuming, so we very much just want to recognize that and extend that appreciation. Also, it's a good opportunity to reach out and extend gratitude to the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future for their extensive support and contributions to our working group as well. In particular, Cassie, Brian, and also Sarah. You guys have been exceptional. We're extremely grateful. So as Hannah and David mentioned a little bit, our group process was a little bit different from the other working groups given the diversity in conversation. So just to take a moment to explain our process, similar to other groups, we would meet on a monthly basis up until approximately April and May, where we switched to the virtual platform. Before that, our game plan was to meet monthly, bring the whole working group together first, maybe have a presentation from the scientific community, maybe not, maybe just a discussion, before breaking out into our 3 separate subgroups to have unique, distinct conversations. Myself leading emergency management discussions, Judy East leading the conversations on community resilience planning, and then firstly, Dr. Nirav Shah, Rebecca Lincoln, running conversations on public health, and then ultimately Rebecca Bolos in the end. This group, in my opinion, did an exceptional job of reaching out to stakeholder groups throughout the entire process. I should probably preface this by saying we were only required to reach out to 2 or 3, and between Judy, Rebecca, and myself, there were a total of 14 stakeholder groups incorporated into this process. Sincerely valued feedback. We incorporated as much as we could, and we'll certainly take that on in the future as well. Given the unique structure of this working group and our distinct conversations, I figured it would first just be prudent to address each scope as a means to kind of build the path towards how we actually ended up with the 8 final strategies we'll be discussing today. For community resilience planning, Judy and her group did an exceptional job of really using that climate lens to have really in-depth discussions on policy, regulation, funding decisions, which ultimately we corroborated our information a little bit with the emergency management group as well. Public health had great discussions on impacts from changing climate, particularly as they pertain to protection of human, animal, and environmental health. And the emergency management subgroup spent the last 8 months performing what I like to say is a rudimentary vulnerability assessment across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors in the state of Maine. So in collaboration with the scientific and technical subcommittee, the group did evaluate known and projected vulnerabilities across all recognized natural hazards, in turn molding the discussion on strategies that would best safeguard the effects of climate change on Maine's infrastructure, residents, and ultimately the economy. With that being said, what we'll be discussing today is a breakdown of our final 8 recommendations. From the Community Resilience Planning, you'll hear a breakdown of their comprehensive review of Maine laws strategy, technical assistance, and funding mechanism strategy. For public health, they put 4 recommendations forward: public health monitoring and education, public education, high intensity weather events, and improving health systems capacity to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And lastly, on behalf of emergency management, a state infrastructure climate adaptation fund. And with that, I will pass it over to Judy.
Thank you, Annie, and good morning, everybody. The resilience subgroup has the 3 strategies. I'd like to stress first that they are very much interrelated and reinforcing of one another. The first one calls for, and with our 9 draft sub-strategies, initiates this comprehensive review and revision of several Maine statutes and their associated regs to support adaptation and resilience. So it's essentially the laws and rules that affect, amongst all of them, the land and water uses rules, and especially where land and water use interact. And I'd like to acknowledge both the working group contributions here, as well as many individuals in state agencies. So my own agency, Land Use Planning Commission, Maine DEP, Floodplain Management, Geological Survey, Municipal Planning Assistance. We had a lot of input there. I think we captured the wisdom in the room as we discussed these issues, and we recognize that this is a long process. Obviously, commissions and the legislature will weigh in. This is the beginning of this process, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't, as we discussed these issues, lose the detail that was being discussed. The way that we're recommending this review and changes to the laws is that it be guided by best available science from the Science and Technical Committee, especially with respect to projections on sea level rise and river and flooding, that we're consistent across statutes, and that as we contemplate these changes, we minimize the compliance burden on applicants, permitting and compliance staff at all levels, and that this is in service, this minimization of compliance is in service both of resilience as well as economic security and recovery. And again, associated with economic recovery is, as these statutes are examined, that we enable development in areas identified by communities and where the vulnerabilities are not there, and where we need to really link economic recovery with resilience planning. And as I mentioned, the three strategies hang together. So in the working group and with the stakeholder input, we recommend coordinating this kind of change with very robust technical assistance and training. So associated with that is the next strategy, which is to improve the delivery system on technical assistance or of technical assistance on resilience to municipalities. The map on the right summarizes outreach to all of the regional planning commissions to get a sense of what our baseline is right now. So there is an infrastructure providing technical assistance. So summarizing the colors, the dark blue is where you have municipal in-house planning support, the lighter and strong regional support. The lighter blue is where you have some in-house support, but not necessarily strong regional resilience capacity. Yellow, there's relatively strong regional capacity. Orange and red, though, there's no in-house municipal support or capacity for this kind of planning, and the regional capacity is pretty thin on the ground. So we're recommending establishing an institutional infrastructure at the state level and the regional level that then helps municipalities engage in this kind of planning, to assess their vulnerabilities, to train and certify code enforcement officers, and to support the delivery of this technical assistance. We've got good functional regional networks. They have good relationships from the regional level with their service areas. And finally, we also want to recognize that we need to leverage the existing expertise that's out there in the nonprofit, private, and academic sectors. So we're not just talking about the regional planning agencies, but a deep bench of expertise that exists that can contribute, or is already contributing to our understanding of our vulnerabilities and our how we can become more resilient. Associated with that understanding is that the magnitude of the impacts of climate change, they're considerable, and they vary a lot across the state. So the hazards and risks are very different in rural inland towns than in urban coastal areas. And the understanding of those vulnerabilities varies a lot as well. Likewise, the capacity to address them. And when I mention the technical assistance, it's not just in resilience, though that has been our focus, but also in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and providing assistance to towns in how they can achieve that kind of understanding and make progress. A strong recommendation that came up in the working group was to not reinvent the wheel. We have functional existing governance structures and processes. If we're looking at this kind of change, we can integrate within them, within existing plans, regulations, and governing structures. What we need to do is incentivize municipalities to find that integration and to support them in understanding the impacts of a changing climate. So assistance should be scaled to differing sizes and types of communities. We also recognize that there are a lot of tools out there already about how to assess your vulnerabilities and how to respond with resilience activities and to apply for funding. But it's not exactly clear to a municipality how to navigate. So we're recommending a clearinghouse and some kind of a tool to help you get the information you need efficiently and quickly. Associated again with that is that there are a lot of good case studies that describe successful resilience projects. The Maine Coastal Program has them. They're tight, 2-page case studies describing what they did, the money they got, who helped them, and that kind of information, that transferable knowledge is really important now, and we're recommending that that be distributed more broadly than I think it already has. So there is an existing mechanism here. We're suggesting that we don't reinvent it, but we air up the tires. So the final recommendation has to do with money. As we've discussed several times already, the profound economic disruption posed by the pandemic will demand even greater efficiency than we already knew we had to achieve at the beginning, 9 months ago. So we have a cluster of recommendations that speaks to the need for coordination and incentivizing behavior, and then a cluster that deals with the actual money and how to leverage and be innovative. So over on the left-hand side first with coordinate and incentivize, we're recommending maximizing our incentiveness when awarding funds so that there be cabinet level leadership akin to, say, the former Land and Water Resources Council, where they're coordinating agency efforts at that level. We're also suggesting another clearinghouse of potential sources of funding. That, by the way, is well underway, but not being able to navigate it is part of the recommendation. And that we want to incentivize cooperation and regional thinking in order to help municipalities be competitive with grant applications and be ready to know what their vulnerabilities are and what the specific responses can be. So again, linked very much to strong technical assistance to communities to prepare plans and to apply for funding. Over on the right, we did, this is a very short summary of a considerable amount of research, which is footnoted and linked to examples from other states, where we're looking at innovative financing ideas, again, many that link resilience with economic recovery, and minimize as much as we can the tax burden that we face in addressing what will be quite costly in many cases, infrastructure needs associated with our current vulnerabilities. So to hit a few highlights, modify tax increment financing districts so to allow resilience investments. So in addition to sidewalks, parking areas, street lamps, and what have you, invest that tax increment financing money in culverts, stormwater backflow prevention, matching funds for wastewater treatment, engineering design. There are some really good examples in Massachusetts and Rhode Island of climate resilience bonds. We stress that some of these new funds be revolving loan funds to enable some sustainability there, and that low interest incentives, especially that link resilience with economic recovery, are included in those kinds of revolving loan funds. Another great example from Rhode Island that they've just created is an infrastructure bank. We're suggesting the same thing. Could be housed at the Maine Municipal Bond Bank. What they've done in Rhode Island is merge the management of funds across resilience and economic development. We think this is has great potential. So think clean water, drinking water, wastewater, land acquisition, brownfields, transportation, housing, energy efficiency. House the expertise around financing in one place, so that how to get the money is customer-centric, the customer being the municipality. You still need the program information in align agencies, but think about getting the expertise around financing in one place. There are some newer models around pursuing larger capital markets that we've got some research in there some great ideas with climate resilience authorities as well. And I can't go into all the details, so I'll just finish on two items that we want to stress. The resilience subgroup fully supports the emergency management subgroup's recommendation, this last one, the last bullet on the lower right there, to create a state infrastructure climate adaptation fund, particularly because one of the stresses here is to cover the local cost shares associated with some of these big projects where you're looking for federal money. That money can be very difficult for municipalities to generate. Anne will provide lots more detail on that recommendation, and we're just putting our support forward. And then finally, the Maine Climate Core idea came up in an outreach meeting with the public health subgroup for a climate-related workforce development initiative that trains the new generation of climate professionals. And it runs the gamut. This is the construction trades, sciences, law, real estate, financing, design, engineering. And we see this as a very powerful recommendation to link resilience with economic recovery. And I'm going to pass the baton to Becca.
Thanks, Judy. So I thought I would start my presentation with some framing of how addressing climate change, strengthening the economy, and particularly in light of the pandemic, and improving public health are all connected, building somewhat or an extension somewhat of Director Shaw's comments yesterday morning. So I created this Venn diagram to illustrate the intersections of these three areas, and including some of the strategies that working groups have put forward to the Climate Council. And that's not to say there aren't other strategies and recommendations that don't belong in the center. And it's also not to say there aren't strategies or initiatives that don't belong in those outer rings. I just really wanted to focus this slide on the intersection between these three areas. I also want to draw your attention to, in the middle, the focus on health equity, which means that everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. And that requires us to remove obstacles and barriers to achieving good health. And that includes investments in education, in safe housing, quality education, and in safe environments. And so with investments in different areas like this, we will not only be addressing climate change, strengthening the economy, and improving public health, but we'll also be tackling determinants of health that have negatively and disproportionately impacted different members of society. And most notably, these factors can work in the other direction and can help us to create and sustain more resilient communities and provide better health and economic well-being of Maine people across the state. So we had a very diverse public health subgroup with a very wide range, I think, of our training, our interests, and our expertise in public health. And so what we did was recognize the work that would be coming out of the other subgroups and identified areas that we thought we could uniquely address and prepare in terms of strategy recommendations to the Climate Council, with an endorsement that you'll see in our cover letter of other public health oriented strategies coming out of the other subgroups. And as Annie mentioned in the beginning, we have four strategies total to recommend. And the first is focused on increased investments in public health monitoring and education. So public health monitoring is the foundation of a successful, strong, and equitable public health system. And so our broad strategy here is to suggest increased investments in monitoring and educational capacity across the state in order to get the data we need to appropriately identify and address emerging climate-related issues. And also the educational component of that is increasing awareness, usage, and understanding of the different data that are available. And also mirroring comments that Director Shaw made yesterday, communicating these data in effective ways for different audiences across the state will help ensure the usage of the data and also to help influence public health behavior in different ways. So the specific actions that we're recommending focus on targeted investments in several different areas of public health, including freshwater and marine harmful algal bloom monitoring, the creation of vector-borne control districts, and notably as well, increasing air quality monitoring so that allergen, particulate matter, and ozone monitoring is occurring in all 16 counties. The counties without monitoring right now also have some of the highest percentage of population with lung or with cardiovascular disease. And so they're at greater risk for adverse impacts of unhealthy air. So increasing monitoring in these areas could also help improve health outcomes in those areas. Our next strategy focuses on public education about climate change and resources that are available to Maine people. And so again, providing clear, consistent messaging about health effects and resources we consider to be essential for ensuring the public is prepared to adapt and understands the reasoning for adapt. And then that hopefully will help encourage changes in behavior. So we've included a list of opportunities for improved public communication, including awareness of DEP's air quality alerts and reframing heat pumps as heat-cool pumps. And for this strategy, we also included recommendations to use principles of health literacy and to prepare culturally appropriate and locally delivered messages. Our next strategy focuses on helping private homeowners, businesses, and municipalities prepare for high-intensity weather events, such as through source water protection ordinances, the use of low-impact development strategies and municipal development plans, and in municipalities with combined sewer overflow discharge points to evaluate and prioritize replacement or upgrades of their existing infrastructure in order to prevent future discharges into water bodies that have contact with humans or shellfish. Lastly, recognizing that health systems or hospitals account for nearly 1/10 of US greenhouse gas emissions, we proposed incentivizing carbon neutrality among Maine's 4 largest health systems within 6 years and included different strategies for helping them achieve that. And building off of our previous strategy, we propose to incentivize hospitals to develop and implement preparedness plans to adapt to extreme weather events. And then lastly, Maine's largest health systems conduct what's called the Community Health Needs Assessment, which is a requirement of the ACA, and it's used to inform our state health improvement plan. And as part of that, hospitals invest in community benefits, and we suggest that these investments could align with broader state health priorities, including climate-related activities. And this would entail increased partnership between health systems, Maine CDC, and non-governmental stakeholders. And with that, I will turn it back over to Annie. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. Over the last 8 months, the Emergency Management Working Group has, in our discussions, found a repetitive 4 things that kind of keep coming to the forefront in our discussions: data deficiencies on hazards, the need for a comprehensive vulnerability analysis, lack of personnel resources, and also the funding issue we'll discuss today. So Maine in itself is really, relatively speaking, a pretty data deficient state. There is the need for more information, more data for the scientific community to put projections forward on a number of natural hazards that we really weren't able to address just because there's a lack of data. Drought, for example, is a big one. We really didn't touch on too much because the scientific expertise doesn't yet exist. We would like to see things like more stream gauges funded, but that reverts back to a root cause of being a funding issue. So we have data deficiencies. I wanted to, before I got into the adaptation fund, bring light to the transportation working group's comprehensive vulnerability assessment of critical infrastructure that was presented out yesterday. The emergency management group consciously and fully corroborated our portion and also collaborated on that being put forward. And I do want to make sure it's notated that, you know, it is an important feature to emergency management to see something like that put forward as a way to be a more secure package with the State Infrastructure Climate Adaptation Fund to better improve resiliency in Maine. Thirdly, and this one was covered by the Community Resilience Planning Group, the technical assistance piece. So often in my job and in the jobs of my subgroup members, technical assistance is a huge topic of conversation. I mean, you have town managers, which are also road commissioners, which are also EMA directors. They're wearing a lot of different hats. They don't have the ability to actually pursue funding opportunities. So Judy's piece absolutely ties into the success of the State Infrastructure Climate Adaptation Fund as well. So I just wanted to bring that to the forefront before actually elaborating on the funding piece, which in our group's opinion was perhaps the biggest gap that we found in terms of securing resilience and the future of Maine's economy, public safety, and public health. So my biggest take-home message about this strategy is that it's not just a focus on the need for money. I just want to recognize the fact that money is always an issue across any level of government. This strategy in particular, what our aim was to do was to put a limelight on what we call the whole community approach. So there is currently an enormous amount of federal funding available across EDA, NOAA, FEMA, for example. However, the issue is that all those come with cost shares. FEMA, for example, has a 75% federal, 25% non-federal cost share. Currently, the state of Maine has 1,798 mitigation projects addressed across the 16 county hazard mitigation plans, equivalent to a backlog of 325 million projects. 313 of those are actually specifically listed due to lack of funding. So at this point in time, the EMA community is very well aware, especially with planning funds being available, where some of the vulnerabilities in the state do exist at the local level. It's just that funding piece and meeting that local cost share, which makes things unfeasible and unable to move forward. So what this strategy does is it proposes putting together a state infrastructure climate adaptation fund with the nuances to kind of corroborate a lot of the other pieces moving forward as well, an incentivization piece as well. So what our group did talk about is the ability to put forward either a point system, percentage system to incorporate any level of collaboration or with the state hazard mitigation plan, climate adaptation plan, participation in National Flood Insurance Program, community rating system. These are all ways to incentivize a point system for the state to contribute 5%, 10%, up to 15% of a local cost share for a federal program, such as FEMA's pre-disaster mitigation grant, hazard mitigation grant program. There's just a ton of different opportunities. So currently, this has been successful in 13 other states. So if this is something that is considered and moved forward, there are 13 other models to choose from. A 14th state is indeed actually drafting something and putting it through their legislature right now with the same scenarios. So there are other models to tap into. And this is a way to kind of close that gap from keeping adaptation projects moving forward and providing the state of Maine structure and resilience moving into these different scenarios with climate change and sea level rise. Within the strategy, there are a number of case studies that ERG is currently analyzing. This is one I wanted to leave you with and bring to the forefront. There were 14 different structures, including some roads like Deer Isle Causeway, that were depicted within our strategy as high-risk infrastructure by the year 2100 using the scientific and technical subcommittee's recommendations for sea level rise. Majority of those are actually wastewater treatment facilities. Saco Water Resource Recovery Facility is actually one that has already had an engineering analysis conducted at the cost of $80,000. And the results of that study, which is included in the strategy, is proposed adaptation of $10.8 million. You can see from the image here, the proposed inundation by the year 2100, if no action were to be taken. And through ERG's preliminary analysis, if nothing was to be done in the city of Saco, damages could exceed up to 43 million. So there is a need right now for Saco to tap into another resource to kind of assist, to get them from unfeasible to feasible. And this is just one of those. It's one of many examples that I could put forward, and I can easily provide further information to support, not just through the strategy, but through the 14 listed structures as well, all the information you might need to kind of prove the need for the state to contribute to that whole community approach, whether it be up to 15%, just 10%. Of course, it's up for future discussion, but there's a definite need. And with that, I will thank you for your attention. Those are the 8 strategies we as a working group wanted to put forward today. And David, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Anne, Judy, and Becca. Fantastic. Okay, great. As we did yesterday, let's roll right into the next presentation. We're going to do the Coastal and Marine Working Group. I'm just going to turn it over to your 2 co-chairs, and I'll let you take it away and introduce yourselves.
Great. Thanks, David, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of my co-chair, Heather Leslie, from the Darling Marine Center at the University of Maine, I'd like to thank the entire Coastal Marine Working Group for their contributions. And thanks to the Climate Council and the legislature for convening us and giving us this opportunity to present our recommendations about climate change, in particular in the marine and coastal sector. I think this is the only work group that actually is geographically based. So it shows the outsized importance of concerns about the coastal environment and climate change. My name is Kathleen Layden, and I direct Maine's coastal program, which is based at the Department of Marine Resources. So we have 6 strategies to present today, and Heather and I are going to be tag teaming as we go along. So our work group, as has been said of the other work groups, we're large, we're diverse, true to our name, hardworking. So here they are. Heather and I really enjoyed working with this group of energetic, committed group of people who put a lot of effort into the work, but we really want to note that we were not representative of all coastal stakeholder groups, nor could we be with the size and the time that was allotted to us for our tasks. So we're pointing to the need to do additional outreach to not only ground truth our recommendations, we really want to take them on the road and see what others think about them. So our work group process, we had 38 members that were invited to join the work group. We reviewed literature at the beginning. We assessed the strengths of the work group, what we could really talk about from our own knowledge base, and therefore really honed what we could tackle. So some of the things that you're going to see in this presentation, we're not going to talk about setbacks from the ocean or sea level rise rates. We really left that particular piece to the community resiliency group and really focused on the natural environment and working waterfronts. So we started with mutual learning. To get us up to the same speed and level of knowledge through a series of webinars. We then broke into subcommittees. We immediately dispersed this work to our subcommittees, and they did the detailed work. I'm not sure what form of the report that the council is going to see from us, but we have an 8-page summary of the subcommittee's work, and then there are up to 25 pages of detail on some of our strategies. So what we did for outreach, our working group members were active in giving presentations to their constituencies and getting on agendas of groups that were already meeting. We also did a survey to which we received over 400 responses. So this was a popular survey that was circulated far and wide, and we got some really good feedback from that. So coastal towns, they play an outsized role. The coast in general plays an outsized role in our conversations about climate change. Our coastal communities and coastal ecosystems are really foundational to Maine's identity and our economy. And just a few statistics. We know, especially with the talk of the impacts to the tourism industry from COVID-19, coastal tourism is a huge part of our state's economy. Fishing and fish farming, $646 million in landed values in 2019. And the population, 45% of Maine residents live in coastal towns. That's a lot of people. I don't know if any of the work groups have been looking at the possibilities for in-migration, but other people might want to move to Maine and move to the coast when they see their climates changing. So those of us who work on the water or live near the coast, we've all seen these changes. We've seen changes in shoreline erosion. We've seen more flooding at high tide. We've seen compromised infrastructure. Fishermen have seen shifting species. New invasive species have been spotted. And all of this leads to uncertainty, which uncertainty for municipalities in terms of their capital improvements and uncertainties for the business sector, coastal and marine, is not a good thing. But what struck me throughout this process is that the coastal and marine sector has always adapted. We've adapted over time, and there are many opportunities that we're going to lay out in the following slides. So what do we see as some of the opportunities if our recommendations are implemented and, most importantly, properly resourced? A lot of this work involves not only state agencies, but our NGO, university, community, volunteer partnerships, and all will need additional resources. So first benefit, businesses and towns can understand their vulnerabilities. And if they have data and information and technical assistance, as that's another common theme, they'll be able to make sound decisions. Did they elevate? Did they restore? Did they alter business practices? A second benefit is that if we use nature to help coastal adaptation, we'll create green jobs, we'll protect shorelines and habitats, we'll offer more public access, and hopefully we'll save money over more traditional infrastructure, hard infrastructure. Next benefit, we're seeing shifts in habitats, but we think there'll be new and emerging seafood harvesting opportunities as these shifts occur. And imports. We have tremendous opportunities, ports and working waterfronts, to serve perhaps a new renewable energy sector in Maine and regionally. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my co-chair, Heather Leslie, as I mentioned, the director of the Darling Marine Center in Walpole, as we dive into our strategies.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yes, a quick call out to the staff, Jess Riley-Moman, Jess Waller, and our facilitator, Laura Singer, working with CBI, were an amazing support to this group. We had additional support from staff in DMR and DEP and other agencies and institutions, and you know who you all are. We very much appreciate everyone who leaned in for this work. This is a strategy overview slide, and the remaining slides, Kathleen and I will go through these 6 strategies, but briefly, they are tracking climate impacts to support adaptive decision making. Number 2, providing technical assistance and outreach through the Coastal and Marine Information Exchange and the Maine Business Council, Seafood Business Council. Number 3, enhancing mitigation by conserving and restoring coastal habitats. 4, with NatureBased Solutions, promoting climate adaptive ecosystem planning and management. 5, managing for resiliency of Maine's marine fisheries and aquaculture industries. And 6, creating climate-ready working waterfronts. As Kathleen highlighted, all these strategies are draft in terms of the view of the Coastal and Marine Working Group members. They definitely require additional stakeholder discussion and community engagement, and they also require a fuller understanding of the costs and benefits, and specifically who will bear those costs and who will benefit from these strategies, particularly in our state's more remote and rural coastal and island communities. The first strategy, as I said, is focused on tracking climate impacts to support adaptive decision making. This is essentially monitoring for climate change preparedness. And it involves a series of actions, including establishing a state-level climate collaborative for coastal and marine monitoring. Second, collecting, assessing, and sharing information on how climate change is affecting our coastal and marine areas in order to support that decision-making, both at the local level and at higher levels. And finally, this strategy leverages existing programs that are led by a wide range of state, nonprofit, academic, government, and citizen science partners throughout our state. As an example, if you look to the right here, you see a picture of a fishing vessel where Maine Department of Marine Resource staff through the Maine Coastal Program are leading monitoring of nearshore marine habitats and doing mapping in collaboration with fishermen. You also see in the upper right, work by the Maine Coastal Program scientists tracking salt marsh change. As sea level rises, so do marshes, and it's important for us to keep track of those in terms of coastal community resilience and many of the goals related to the council. Many of the existing monitoring programs we have in this state were not established to track implications of climate change, but they can be adjusted going forward in order to give us the information that we need to do adaptive decision making at different levels. The second strategy focuses on technical assistance and outreach, just as you heard from the previous group. And in coordination with that monitoring collaborative that I just discussed, we envision 2 pieces of the technical assistance. The first one, the Coastal and Marine Information Exchange, is focused on stakeholders, municipal officials and other residents and individuals working at the local level, and ensuring that they have the information that they need in order to make decisions. The second element of this technical assistance is tailored specifically to Maine's seafood industry and to the harvesters, the shoreside businesses, and the working waterfront entities that need tailored information and decision support so that they can make operational decisions, capital investments, and long-range plans so as to respond to the changing climate and to adapt and mitigate accordingly. This picture on the right is a picture of a commercial clammer who's talking with students as part of the Maine Shellfish Learning Network. This learning network is an example of existing programs that are already doing this type of integrated technical assistance and learning support throughout our state. This network supports more than 20 different coastal community projects from Lubec to Yarmouth. And in each case, community members are helping to protect and improve community managed shell fisheries. So I just want to highlight that example, one of many, of how there's already traction and investment at the local level with state and federal support to do this type of technical assistance and outreach that's tailored to coastal and marine needs. Kathleen, you're up.
Yes, so this is our blue carbon strategy, and it's a mitigation strategy, how to enhance greenhouse gas emissions by conserving and restoring coastal habitats. This is a very exciting strategy, and I think is getting a lot of traction in the state, regionally, and even nationally. So this strategy harnesses the ability of what we refer to as coastal blue carbon resources that can help meet Maine's greenhouse gas reduction goals. The term coastal blue carbon refers to carbon that's sequestered by coastal ecosystems like salt marshes and seagrass beds. And it turns out that blue carbon ecosystems are an order of magnitude more efficient at burying carbon per unit than forests. When they're degraded, flooded with fresh water, or drained, they become sources of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, including methane. Luckily, the diverse geological features and the vast length of Maine's coastline provide us with abundant natural opportunities to sequester greenhouse gas. The co-benefits from this strategy include flood storage, buffering against damaging storms, improving the health and resilience of coastal ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, and really protecting nursery areas that Maine's coastal fisheries depend on. So how do we do this? What are the essential components? And we've got 3 bullets up on our slide. One is really mapping, modeling, and monitoring. So we're proposing to do a comprehensive inventory of blue carbon resources. What are our baseline estimates of current storage? What are the opportunities for sequestration, and how do we track that over time? The second, and very important, is creating a financing mechanism for carbon credits. So using those resources, those funds, to offer these systems full protection. And we've heard that as a theme. Judy Easterly talked very eloquently about how to establish these types of financing mechanisms. And related is increasing the conservation and restoration of these ecosystems so that we can obtain these climate benefits, mitigation benefits. So some of the things that were mentioned as actions by this subcommittee: can we enhance environmental conditions to promote plant growth? Can we create or restore salt marsh and eelgrass habitat where conditions remain suitable or can be made suitable? And what about seaweed aquaculture? Are there ways that seaweed aquaculture can sequester carbon, and how do we optimize that? So this strategy, number 4, is about nature-based solutions, using nature-based solutions to promote climate adaptation. This is a very simple notion, and many of us who are land use planners, coastal planners, and others in the field may have read Design with Nature, written by Ian McHarg back in the 1970s. It's a favorite book on my bookshelf, and it's really about staying away from natural resources, allowing them to keep their functionality and deliver the benefits that we want. So some of those benefits from marshes: pollution filtration, retaining stormwater, nursery grounds for juvenile fish. We're also talking about protecting and maintaining beaches. In some cases, it may make sense to nourish beaches, which costs money. Managing dunes, protecting salt marshes. They all protect low-lying adjacent development. They also support vulnerable species and offer a lot of benefits for recreation and tourism. So how do we get there? The first bullet is planning. Looking at natural systems through a climate lens. How do natural systems support land use development and vice versa? The development community is a partner in this. we need to offer incentives to help them do it. Habitat creation and enhancement. We have an example right now in Casco Bay in the town of Brunswick, partnering with the Nature Conservancy, Maine Coast Heritage Trust, the town of Brunswick. I'm forgetting partners, but many of them, who so far we've installed 2 of 3 living shorelines, which are basically using natural treatments like fallen wood and bagged, aged, clean oyster shell to create habitat and also mitigate shoreline erosion. So there are permitting challenges for those, financing challenges. Let's get more of those case studies on the ground and monitor what they're doing. The next bullet is about restoration. The picture to the slide is a perched culvert over a tidal stream. At 900 locations in Maine, tidal flow is hindered or blocked by culverts, bridges, and dams. This particular culvert is perched way above the marsh creek, and it can't accommodate present and projected tidal flows, as well as pass fish and serve important wildlife. So an example of something that's ongoing right now is an effort to create best management practices through a program called Coastwise. So how can we bring education and training to local officials and restoration practitioners about restoring these tidal culvert sites? It's not the same and requires special expertise and training. And then stormwater management, our last bullet on that slide. We know that it carries pollutants. In many locations, or some locations, there are elevated levels of nitrogen in stormwater, affects the pH and salinity of estuarine waters, and therefore the things that can grow there. So we're having increased stormwater intensities. So we do have laws, rules, and guidance at the federal level, the state level, the municipal level, where we're coming at this from a number of different governance foci. But some of the ways that we can address stormwater, we definitely need to tighten up those regulations. In terms of development, low impact development, green roofs, rain gardens, public processes like watershed planning, reducing nutrient loading where it's needed. And then very importantly, in some parts of the coast, particularly Casco Bay, determine whether or not to set numeric criteria for nitrogen in marine waters.
So strategy 5 is focused on managing for resilience of Maine's fisheries and aquaculture industries. There's 3 big bullets here, and there's multiple actions that the group is proposing under each of these. So at the very highest level, this strategy highlights ways that we can strengthen fisheries management to ensure sustainable fisheries and new opportunities as fisheries adapt to climate change. It also highlights market support and business resilience needs, as well as regulatory and policy objectives that are necessary to enable Maine's fisheries and aquaculture operations to remain reliable economic contributors as they adapt to climate change. So there's a lot of complement with this fishery and aquaculture focused strategy, and the first 2 that I talked about, strategies 1 and 2, focused on monitoring and technical assistance and outreach respectively. As Kathleen mentioned at the beginning, coastal community members, and particularly fishermen, are masters of adaptation and have been responding to change in the environment and in the economy for a long time. So this strategy is about providing more tools and resources for fishermen and fisheries managers to do what they already do very well. And as with earlier strategies, there's some exciting things already underway. On the left here, you can see a plate of green crabs. So this is an example of how we can take an emerging pesky species on the Maine coast and change it into something that people like to eat. And on the right, you can see an image of the Maine Department of Marine Resources scientists. They're preparing an instrument for field deployment. And instruments like these complement the statewide sampling, like the Maine, New Hampshire inshore trawl survey, that are so vital to supporting fisheries management in our state. So there's already a lot of really good groundwork laid. An important caveat here is that this strategy requires a lot more conversation and consideration by members of the industry themselves. We had some great input and public outreach over the last month, but there's a lot more conversation to be had. Back to Kathleen to wrap it up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather. In our last strategy, we're turning back to the land and water interface and focusing on working waterfronts. And in this presentation, we're talking about those facilities that are adjacent to, in, out, or over the water, and they truly rely on a waterfront location to conduct operations. They provide a wide range of access and associated facilities for many sectors: fishing, transportation, security, tourism, and our villages and downtowns are organized around waterfronts. They're thriving historical and cultural places that people love to visit. They also operate as a system. When something happens in one part of the supply chain, it affects everything else, as we've seen recently. Working waterfronts are facing critical challenges in a changing climate. I won't repeat the wave action and everything that's coming from the seaside, but warmer seas are changing the composition of fisheries landings. Melting Arctic will change trade routes, and our need for ocean renewables may require additional retooling and expansion of our ports and waterfronts. And finally, the new uses of the ocean and ports and working waterfronts will need to responsibly coexist. There are tremendous opportunities here. Marine infrastructure is designed to be wet. It gets wet, and you can retrofit it, although it is expensive. There may be opportunities when we see who are the winners and losers, who can make the investments that are necessary along the waterfront to be able to remain resilient. There are opportunities for redevelopment that will occur that I think could favor expansion of working waterfronts. And then new technology is another opportunity. Boats and marine engines, new technology, best management practices in the cruise ship industry, and increases in solar energy at these facilities can reduce the carbon footprint. So quickly, 3 strategies: create an infrastructure trust fund, a revolving loan fund. These fixes can be simple to really complicated. Coastal Program recently concluded an analysis in Penn Bay where we looked at 8 working waterfronts facilities, and in addition to the deferred maintenance, the areas were presented with a blueprint for how they could improve their structures and their operations. And it's upwards of $250,000 to do those types of resiliency measures at some of these places. The second bullet is about technical assistance. I won't go into that because it's been covered in great detail. Protect the state's investment in working waterfronts. When we're providing funds for construction of facilities, purchasing land, purchasing covenants on fishing properties, let's look at this through a climate lens. What is that waterfront going to look like given future projections? And then we have a regulatory improvement piece as well. The Coastal Resiliency Group, all the information behind Judy's work is a very careful analysis of state laws that we really think need to be tweaked and tightened up in many cases. So the point we want to make here is, what can we do about the flood insurance burden for these facilities? They're meant to get wet, but they have high cost in terms of flood insurance. And they also have a very complex, they're some of the most highly regulated places. And we need to, when we're rethinking our regulatory and non-regulatory approaches, don't make it more complicated. Let's look at, shoreland zoning, Natural Resources Protection Act, and floodplain management. And David, I've got two really quick things. We learned that there are a lot of examples of mitigation happening. Reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Maine in the coastal and marine sector, even though it's a small part of our coastal emissions pie. So we've learned about hybrid diesel ferries that are on order. The picture to the lower right is a solar panel array in Islesford. Just tremendous opportunity. So we want to keep that conversation with a larger group of folks that are interested in working waterfronts and ports and see how much further we can get. I'm just going to point out the beautiful boat on the upper right. Ask Stacy Kiefer of the Maine Marine Trades Association. It's a really wonderful and large, beautiful boat. So with that, I think, David, if we went over time, I'm sorry, but we are finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen and Heather. Fantastic. You know, as Jerry said yesterday, one of the cruelest things that we've done to the co-chairs after all their months of service is to force you to synthesize it into 20 minutes. So we recognize the cruelty of that. Thank you for a really comprehensive presentation. Let's go directly into our final presentation, which is Natural Working Lands, and I'll invite the two co-chairs to introduce themselves and kick us off.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Beal, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I'm pleased to be here today along with my co-chair of the working group, Tom Abello, who will be presenting the strategies in just a little bit. First of all, I'd like to recognize the 24 members of the Natural and Working Lands Working Group, each of whom were asked to devote about 40 hours to all of our meetings, not to mention many additional hours of preparation for each meeting, which included reviewing more than 1,000 pages of briefing documents and countless drafts of strategy documents. Some of these working group members were also tapped for their expertise and asked to create formal presentations to the working group. And as you can see, members of our group represent diverse interests, from large forest landowners to small woodlot owners, loggers, environmental groups, farmers, natural resource agencies, scientific researchers, and more. So in addition to thanking them for their incredible work, I'd also like to acknowledge that we were very fortunate to work with a skilled facilitator over the past several months, Jody Sapphire. And I also want to express our appreciation for the work of Tom Gordon from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, who served as primary staff support for the working group. Both of their contributions were critically important to us achieving our goals. So first, I will start out by saying that given the amount of time that we had and the size of our working group and the breadth of our scope, we didn't attempt to prioritize the strategies that we're presenting here today. And we also did not attempt to assign metrics or measures, as we see that work as part of the next steps on the road to implementation. What we did do is focus on making sure we fleshed out what felt like the right strategies and that they were supported by everyone in the group. We also wanted to make it clear up front that we did not expect everyone to agree all of the time, and that was okay, and that any disagreements would be noted in the final report out to the Climate Council if they couldn't be resolved. Members in our group were highly engaged as we worked through many complex issues. And we are pleased that in the end, we arrived at consensus on all 5 of our strategies and all but only one of our sub-strategies. And that one exception is noted in our report to the Climate Council. On a functional level, we arrived at our strategies through the following process. We held monthly work group meetings as well as numerous subgroup meetings. And because of the scope of our subject area, we began by really aiming to bring the whole group to a base level of understanding about both the opportunities for natural and working lands to play a role in mitigating carbon, as well as to understand the climate change impacts on these lands and the industries that they support. We also wanted to ensure that we were all starting from a place of recognizing that our natural and working lands can provide climate solutions while playing an important role in our economy and in creating products and/or services that are important to our everyday lives. So to that end, we had a series of expert presentations followed by robust discussions that were organized around 3 topic areas: natural lands, forestry, and agriculture. And once we achieved that baseline understanding, we broke into 3 corresponding subgroups that met multiple times in between working group meetings to tackle coming up with a proposed set of strategies. And then the whole group analyzed and discussed all of the proposed strategies. And this led to an opportunity to do some grouping into more cross-cutting strategy areas that in most cases would address both natural and working lands. Once we did that, we had another round of subgroup meetings organized by these new overarching strategy areas, the results of which are what we are presenting today. In terms of public engagement, along the way, we had very active and ongoing involvement from the public, and a number of people regularly attended our in-person and Zoom meetings and provided really valuable feedback and background information throughout our process. And last month, we also held an open public comment period. And as a result, we received 93 responses, which definitely helped to shape our final recommendations. And here I'll note that one of the recurring topics that public members commented on was that we hadn't done enough to address aquatic resources and how they fit into the landscape. So just prior to our final meeting earlier this month, an additional subgroup met to address this omission and prepare a proposal for the whole working group to consider at our last meeting. And that at that meeting on June 6th, we discussed public comments and this additional proposed language related to aquatic resources and determined as a group what to incorporate into our strategy document. So that's how we got to where we are now. But before jumping right into our strategies, I just want to take a few more minutes to add a bit more context to the importance of our natural and working lands. So the point of this the first top right-hand square here is essentially to note that these lands are the base for very important sectors of our economy. Our agriculture, forestry, and outdoor recreation sectors combined contributes more than $20 billion to our state's economy annually and supports approximately 140,000 jobs. Investing in the strategies we have identified could serve to grow the overall economic contribution of these sectors further. And in the second box there, we just want to recognize that in addition to the economic benefit, our natural and working lands provide numerous other benefits, including ecosystem services, such as those listed on this slide and many more. And overall, yes, the strategies that we've developed will cost something to implement, but we believe that doing so will be good for our economy and will help us to build economic, ecological, and community resilience. So it's important to recognize that our natural and working lands already sequester a significant amount of carbon, equivalent to approximately 75% of Maine's current greenhouse gas emissions. And as the most forested state in the nation, our vast forest resources of more than 17 million acres already offer tremendous carbon benefits to Maine and the nation. But we also have an opportunity to further maximize the positive potential of our forest and agricultural products and to further reduce our overall emissions footprint. For example, we can encourage building structures with wood-based materials to sequester carbon, strengthen the forest products demand, and keep the forest economy strong. We can also utilize forest products in a way that replaces the use of those made with other materials that have a higher emissions profile. We can also ensure that more of the food we consume is grown in a way that maximizes soil health and the opportunity to sequester carbon. As it stands now, approximately 90% of the food we consume comes from outside of Maine. Committing to growing more of our food in our state while maximizing soil and climate-friendly practices can provide us with an opportunity to more directly address climate impacts of food production. Finally, I want to speak to the issue of threats to our land by climate change and sprawl. We know that climate change is having multiple adverse effects on our natural environment. These include impacts to our forests that will result in a shift in species mix and density. These changes may ultimately reduce the capacity of the land to sequester carbon, provide connected wildlife habitat, and also threatens to weaken the economy of our working lands. The potential for wildfire seems to be increasing, and our forests and farmlands are increasingly threatened by invasive pests that can gain a foothold as climate conditions change. And we know that extreme weather events can cause costly and destructive erosion issues and water quality issues as well. And finally, it's important to understand that these two threats to our lands, climate change and sprawl, are intrinsically linked, in that the loss of land to development diminishes our greatest tool for sequestering carbon. Suburban sprawl, particularly in southern and coastal Maine, is consuming approximately 10,000 acres of working lands or open space each year. But sprawl is a phenomenon that is also taking place in rural areas of the state as well. The bottom line is that we cannot lose forest or farmland and still maintain the significant carbon benefits that these lands provide. So with that, I will now turn it over to Tom, who's going to walk us through our strategies.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hello, everyone. You have our recommended strategies and sub-strategies in your briefing materials, and we'll dig into each one, but just as a quick overview, the 5 are: number 1, the conservation of working lands and natural areas; number 2, financial assistance for carbon-friendly practices for foresters, farmers, and landowners; number 3, technical assistance to landowners and managers for carbon-friendly practices for forestry, agriculture, and wildlife habitat; number 4, update state programs to ensure that our planning, policies, and promotion address climate; and number 5, support for ongoing research on climate solutions. Taking these steps will have almost immediate benefits for economy and our climate. So let's dig into those. Strategy 1. Throughout our working group process, we heard a common theme: maintain what you have. As the Commissioner noted, Maine is the most forested state in the nation at about 90%. Over the last 20 years, Maine has increased its conserved lands from 6% to about 20%. This has been achieved primarily through conservation easements. We can do more on this front, and we should, to maintain our forest and agriculture base. Because as we've learned through this process, our working lands sequester 75% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. This strategy proposes a dedicated, sustained funding source to provide permanent conservation for forest lands, farmlands, and areas of exceptional biodiversity value. We see this primarily through easements and fee acquisition, and it's important to note at the state level, the Land for Maine's Future program, which has been the consistent funding source for these types of activities, has not been funded in nearly a decade. Finally, a piece of this is ensuring that our conservation programs also incorporate climate mitigation and resiliency goals into their grant criteria and project selection. Strategy 2. Most of our working and natural lands are privately owned, about 93%, and we rely upon these landowners to be good stewards for public and personal benefit. Financial incentives help landowners implement more carbon-friendly land management practices and thereby sequester more carbon. One of these incentives is the concept of a voluntary program for small to medium-sized woodlot owners to be paid for specific carbon-friendly forestry actions, such as pre-commercial thinnings or a focus on longer timeframes between harvests. Moving to implementation will require additional stakeholder discussions to sort out the scope and impact, but we believe this idea should be implemented over the coming months. At the same time, there was consensus in our working group that property taxation policy for working lands and open space is a critical incentive for land management. We currently have about 11.5 million acres statewide enrolled in these 3 taxation programs, the majority of which is in the tree growth program. They've arguably done more than any other state policy or initiative to keep our working and natural lands intact. Generally speaking, the tree growth program is working well and has been reviewed by the legislature dozens of times since its inception. But more can be done to update the open space and farmland current use taxation programs to incentivize climate-friendly land management practices. Both of these haven't been fully updated since their inception back in the 1970s. At the same time, we recognize that these programs can have impacts on municipal budgets, and that should be addressed as we improve these programs. The working group also recommends the use of efficient modern wood heat and power technology, utilizing mill waste and the tops and limbs of harvested trees. This dovetails with what we heard yesterday from both the energy and buildings working groups. The use of these systems will bolster markets for sawmill residuals, pre-commercial thinnings, and poor quality trees. I'd note that we received a lot of public comment expressing concern about the net carbon benefits and impacts of burning wood, and we'll want to work with the other working groups as this moves forward. We also identified the importance of habitat connectivity as part of our strategy for environmental resilience. And we're encouraging investments in infrastructure for private and public roads to allow wildlife crossings and aquatic organism passage. We heard some of that from the transportation working group yesterday and earlier today from the other working groups. Technical assistance. Once again, we lean on private landowners to continue to be good stewards of their land. There are 86,000 family landowners who own 10 acres or more, and yet only 30% of these woodland owners have ever had any professional forestry assistance. These lands, by the nature of their ownership and location, are the lands most at risk for conversion to development. Likewise, there are opportunities to improve on-farm soil conservation practices, but in many cases, landowners simply don't know where to start. The working group recommends additional resources, both staff and funding, and better coordination for agencies and organizations that provide expert advice to local landowners. The use of natural climate solutions on private lands will require extensive one-on-one conversations with landowners and the need to focus our available resources on how we can best meet their needs. Strategy 4, state programs. As we've heard from several other working groups yesterday and this morning, there's an overarching need to effectively coordinate land use planning to address climate issues and to ensure that environmental review and permitting are effective and efficient. Specifically, our working group noted the challenges of balancing the need for significant increases in renewable energy development with the need to maintain working forest and agricultural lands. Wood innovation is another cross-working group strategy. Wood is replacing petroleum in many ways, as the commissioner noted just a few minutes ago, and we need to support a variety of efforts to research, develop, and market innovative uses of wood. Our working group strongly supports state efforts to use innovative wood materials, whether that be cross-laminated timber, wood fiber insulation, or other mass timber products for new construction. We also need to build and invest in our local food economy and avoid the costs and climate impacts of transporting food from out of state. Maine has the ability to feed all of us. Currently, 90% of the food we consume comes from out of state. That needs to change. When we invest in our own food production, it allows us to implement climate-friendly practices. Science and research. As we've heard yesterday, climate mitigation, climate flux, and the cost-benefit analysis is a complex matter. This is especially true for natural working lands where management practices and environmental conditions can vary from year to year. We can't manage what we don't measure, and so ongoing research is a vital component of our strategies. Our working group recommends sustained funding for research on climate change mitigation and adaptation practices by the University of Maine in partnership with other academic institutions, the private sector, and state government. And so in conclusion, natural and working lands hold a tremendous potential to sequester more carbon and offset further emissions from all sectors of Maine's economy. It bears repeating once again that they're already sequestering the equivalent of 75% of Maine's annual greenhouse gas emissions. And we can do more. The proposed strategies, taken as a whole, can deliver on this. The majority of the sub-strategies before you are time-tested and proven to be highly effective. In the end, every additional acre of forest and agricultural land conserved and actively managed for climate outcomes will bring Maine closer to its goal of carbon neutrality, while every acre lost to conversion or not actively managed will make our state's goal harder to reach. And with that, I will turn it over to Jerry and Hannah for the next segment.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Amanda. Fantastic. Very visually pleasing too to watch that. Thank you all for that great presentation. So let's do our panel. Okay, so I'll leave it open. There's no order to this. What's an insight that you've had that gives you hope that might not be immediately obvious? Anybody, feel free to jump in, please.
Well, I'll offer one, and it's actually, I don't think it's an unobvious insight, but to me, what I saw across all the discussions today was a thread around planning and how much of the effort in adaptation would be addressed at the local level, and the need for resources to plan at the local level for capacity at the local level to actually understand the issues and work towards solutions. So I saw that across all of these groups, and I think that's important to note that we really have to look hard at how we're addressing planning right now.
Thanks, Bob.
And something I heard across the board too, which does give me hope, is that, I think that we do have an opportunity to do a lot with existing resources and structures, and can utilize those to really implement or support a number of the strategies that have been discussed today and also yesterday.
Yeah. That's great. Other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would offer one, David, and that is, Maine has been known for its really, going back to shoreland zoning and the sand dune laws, for really innovative natural resource protection. And I think just the breadth and depth of climate change, I think, challenges our siloed approaches to resources and management, and really reinforces the need to team in an interdisciplinary way.
And Kathleen, would you say that this process is headed in the right direction in terms of that interdisciplinary look at it?
Absolutely. I think through our subcommittees and outreach, and Hannah and Jerry's work with the steering committee, keeping the co-chairs together, I think now's when we really need to dig in and operationalize that. It's not easy to do.
Yeah. Right. Other insights, Judy?
I was really struck by the linkage and the support, the very natural linkage and support between efforts to both achieve resilience and also to either reduce greenhouse gas emissions and or sequester carbon, and how that is very strongly linked to economic recovery, and that popped up in so many different ways across all of the working groups. And another aspect of that is that the common threads, we all kind of came at it from a different angle, but some of the solutions are very common across the working groups. So that felt really solid to me.
That's great. Other insights?
Well, just to echo Judy's point, we had quite a lot of discussion about those two pieces of the puzzle, the adaptation and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and sequestration efforts. And I think for a while, some of us were trying to separate them because they are distinct goals of the council process. But as you were saying, Judy, there's so much interlinkage for so many of these strategies and actions between those two elements. And I see that as a real strength across the working groups and certainly within the coastal and marine group.
That's great. Yeah. Other thoughts we have?
David, this is Becca. I think something that gives me hope, or that I've been happy to see, is just that so many of the strategies coming out of the working groups have the potential to work together, but also to positively impact different determinants of health. And I think we have a real opportunity as we move forward in this work to use an equity lens, and to be thinking about how these different initiatives impact different populations across the state. So I feel optimistic about that opportunity.
Yeah. I felt, just on that point, Beck, I felt there were so many interlinkages in what Judy and everyone were saying. It's on these three presentations in particular, is like how things really combined, whether it's public health outcomes, climate outcomes, very interesting. Other reactions from insights from the last few months that really struck folks?
David, I just, in talking about how these are related and interlinked, I think particularly the presentations today speak to how interlinked we are. We think about it often in an economic sector standpoint, but the natural resources of Maine, of which we are so blessed and are so bountiful, are critical to how we both respond. And this is an opportunity to invest in how we manage them for a future that's going to address a number of different issues. Talk about the offset, quote unquote offset, which is a calculation comparing how much our forests and our agricultural lands are taking up of carbon as compared to calculated emissions. And that number will change. 75% was an initial estimate, but it demonstrates how dynamic and integrated all aspects of our natural resources are with our planet, let alone how we function here in Maine. And so this is a really important time for us to be able to invest in what is sort of the heart and soul of who we have been and will be into the future.
Yeah, I agree. That's well said, Ivan. And just add that I think Maine's really well positioned because we have so much forest land, ag land, and coastal land that we can try different things and we can innovate different types of projects, whether that be around carbon sequestration or something else. And so I think moving forward, being able to sort of tap into some of these ideas and these recommendations, I think could have pretty far-reaching. They could serve as a model for other states that are wrestling with very similar issues.
I think I'll add also, in addition to the natural resources that we have, there are a number of times I looked around the room during our meetings or around the Zoom, I guess you could say, later on. And I've just been really impressed by the expertise and the insights and the commitment to working together that everyone brought to the table. And that goes for the public as well. And I think, we had really thoughtful dialogue and we did good work as a group. And I think that has come through with all of the presentations, that people really stepped up. And so I just want to acknowledge, we have incredible human and institutional knowledge here to draw on. And I think when we can tap into that through a good process like the Climate Council, we can solve a lot of problems that come our way.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Anne, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second just to acknowledge the scientific and technical subcommittee and all that they brought to this process. I think it was so brilliant in actually framing the dynamic of this, committee and grand discussion, to have them as a resource, for a couple of reasons. You look at any engineering study out there, you'll get kind of diverse opinions as to what we're looking at for sea level rise. But every time I tapped into the scientific and technical subcommittee, you get a solid answer that was unified across the entire front. And I personally, as an insight, excuse my dog, learned a lot from the process, about natural hazards in Maine. Sometimes we didn't have the data, and that was okay. And it helped frame our discussion.
Yeah, that's really helpful. By the way, our pets do make all kinds of appearances in Zoom meetings, which is great. I love it. It's a humanizing fact. I mean, we're all here in many of us are here in our homes, and that's just a reality at this moment. Okay, any other thoughts around this question of the insight that we want to share? Anything else that really jumped out at you in these months that's worth sharing right now?
David, I would just add one more thing and it's sort of repeating what I often say, but we talk about the costs of different programs and initiatives, and we heard it yesterday and we heard it today. I think just on a small scale, Anne provided the example of in Saco of a certain cost, but what the costs would be if we didn't take adaptive action. That's informed by science. And so, when we say cost for most of these efforts, we're talking about the initial investment, but all of the cost-effective investments pay back more, often many times more than that initial cost. And that's just so important in evaluating what's being recommended here.
At one point, someone had on their slides, I can't remember, it made into the final version of doing nothing isn't free. Right? I think that's part of what you're saying, Ivan, is that, there are costs that are happening.
We had another comment in one of our meetings. Somebody said something, and I think it might have been Andy Whitman from Manomet, but he said climate change will reorganize our economy whether we like it or not. And that's just really stuck with me as a way of thinking about this.
So the second question that, and feel free to keep going on insights, but the second question that we wanted to touch on today is any shifts in your thinking that have happened over the last couple months. And you'll remember from yesterday, and I foolishly didn't update the question right now, but that question can also refer not only to the pandemic, but the social changes that are underfoot right now in our country that are very salient that we spoke about yesterday. So how has this changed your thinking? Today is very different than January, right? Any thoughts on that from these particular sectors that you all were in charge of? Judy, you want to go ahead? Yeah.
It was kind of in the presentation, but just this whole notion that we know this is expensive. Yes, it's worth the investment, but it's still expensive. And the notion of something being expensive when the economy is booming, which it really was when we started, to the uncertainty that we're facing right now has, I don't know that it's changed the thinking around being efficient and coordinated and all of that, but it sure has sharpened that focus. Like, just, there's no wiggle room anymore in how we get our house in order and how we operate efficiently and coordinate with one another. So that really is a resounding implication for us right now in the face of COVID.
Yeah. Kathleen?
For me, it's oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Hi, Bob. I would just offer that I've been thinking a lot about open space and public access and the public's need for that. When we saw that, you know, with places closed, we rely on, you know, we have a lot of open space, a lot of access, not so much on the coast. So I really think that this was illustrative of what happens when the so-called beach blanket space is limited because you need to stay 6 feet apart with your pod. But then what happens if it's high tide and you're up against a seawall? I think that's showing us that we face limitations in our ability of protected places to provide recreation for people in the numbers that we are accustomed to.
Yeah. Bob, you want to jump in?
Sure. For me, I think what I see is a need to really plan to be resilient in the event of some kind of catastrophe. I mean, we're in the middle of this unfortunate, well, and pretty catastrophic event right now that I don't think we all as a community across the state, across the nation, really envisioned or planned for terribly well. Now, we're talking about climate impacts, and we can see sea level rise. And, you know, these things are very real. And I think this drives home for me the need to really focus on how we're going to be resilient, because these things are going to happen. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
David, if I could add one more thing to that as well, to feed off what Bob was saying. Now, throughout this whole process, I want to be clear, we've been kind of using mitigation and adaptation. We're using adaptation. In my world, it would normally be called mitigation. So from FEMA's perspective, a lot of the adaptation discussions we're having apply to the mitigation world within the FEMA side. So excuse me for going back and forth. But there's a lot of studies out there, to echo what Bob was saying, that every dollar invested in mitigation on the forefront, being proactive, saves $6, 6 disaster dollars. And so, you know, these last few years with the October 2017 windstorm, York County's severe coastal storm, now we're dealing with COVID-19, disasters are so horrendously expensive, you know, and we see that, and we're following this model on trend with the rest of the country right now that's not sustainable for FEMA. And so we need to, hopefully Maine can be at the forefront of this discussion, move more towards that mitigation adaptation side. So project mitigation, climate adaptation, to best prepare and safeguard our economy and public safety prior to the next hurricane coming in, which is known to be maybe a bit more catastrophic by 2050 than it would be right now. So it's so important to recognize the things Bob's saying and invest right now in these adaptation strategies, because we're already in deep right now with COVID-19. This stuff's expensive, and it's just going to be exacerbated each disaster that comes in after.
Heather?
These are all really good comments, and more on the content of what the work might yield and the significance of the work. I had a couple of reflections more on the process. And this is essentially, it's been a social process over the last 9 months of responding to environmental change. And it's not ending today. This is just a point that we're marking. One thing that did surprise me is how effective the people involved in the coastal and marine working group process were able to be working largely virtually. And we started working virtually actually in December. We had a couple of webinars, as Kathleen mentioned, as part of our early collective learning together. And then we went back and forth, meeting in person and virtually through the winter, and just knowing that that was going to be easier. And then we totally flipped to virtual meetings in March and did outreach virtually, did all our meetings virtually. The effectiveness of that, as much as I missed seeing people in person and the side conversations you can have in person, was still quite incredible. And it was certainly a lot easier for some people to participate than they would have found otherwise if they'd had to drive 2 or 3 hours to get to our meeting location. So I think that's something that's really important as we move ahead, is to think about how to take advantage of what we've learned these last months in terms of virtual meetings. The other thing I was struck by with the process was that the people who were challenged to participate at the beginning of the working group process, whether they were members or interested members of the public or technical and community experts that we called upon, that became even harder with the pandemic. And so it's driven home for me the importance of thinking about a really diverse and comprehensive set of ways that we engage and talk about this work and how we do this work together, particularly at the community scale. And many others are more expert in that than I am, but it just really, for me, became much sharper, that distinction between those of us who are able to pop into Zoom meetings or be on Zoom meetings at all hours of the day, and other people who many other things need to come first now in all moments of moments. So figuring out how to meet people where they are and how work like this, given how important it is to all of us in Maine with all of our engagement, I think is a really important thing to do going forward, and something certainly my thinking has been enriched by in the last several months.
Yeah. Thanks. Other thoughts on this in terms of what's changed?
I just read your question again, and what comes to mind is that I feel like I went into this, and we've been working on this for months since last fall, coming up with a plan for how to implement change in the light of climate change. And a couple of important things: a pandemic and significant social unrest throughout the country having to do with equity issues are acute. And so we don't have a choice to decide. We have to make decisions. about how we're doing a number of different things. And so I guess what I'm taking with is, in some ways, how opportune it is that we're in this sort of comprehensive process to address climate, which is big and happening now and will continue, as well as these acute issues all at once. We're already engaged in the conversations. They've certainly sharpened how we approach them. And so I think we have to decide now, and here's a pathway to how to do that. We're already engaged in those discussions.
Nice. Thanks, Ivan. Tom, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, David. Just to build on what Kathleen had said just a couple moments ago, I'm not sure if it was a shift in my thinking, but certainly a confirmation of the value that people place on conserved lands. And we saw high numbers, whether that be on state parks, BPL lands, wherever it may be, of people wanting to get out, be in nature, and kind of experience what our natural resources have to offer. And so combined with that, yesterday, we don't get a lot of good news out of DC, but yesterday, the Senate voted to approve the Great America Outdoors Act, which funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund at about $900 million per year. That's based on oil and gas revenues, but Maine will see a significant chunk of that funding to help things like city parks, ball fields, big working forest conservation easements, a whole suite of opportunities. And what we need for that is state match for these local projects and statewide projects. And so there's an opportunity there. I would consider it an urgency for the state to have some pot of money to help supplement this federal money that's coming in.
So the final question that we had used yesterday, I want to just test with you all today and again, and I made the caveat yesterday, it feels a tiny bit gimmicky, but if you were to write a headline about what is this all about, particularly for the 3 set of recommendations we heard today, like what is your headline here? How would you summarize it? Anyone want to take a stab? Kathleen?
Given the fact that we all went to the climate table communication training, David, I have to ask you what the purpose of your headline is. But I'll tell you mine. If it's to get people's attention, it would be something like jellyfish, Jonah crabs, and invasives, oh my. What else will climate change bring? Draws the reader in.
Love it. Great. We're facing real things. You should pay attention. Yes. Heather.
I guess to go back to Judy's point that I think it was Judy's, that there's a lot of great things already going on and existing programs that these strategies build upon. I would focus on that Mainers are resilient and pivoting to a low carbon economy.
Yeah, it's happening. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Tom?
Thanks, David. I was looking for a kind of a man bites dog headline, but I wasn't clever enough to come up with one. So, but I have working in natural lands more than a 9-to-5 job. And I think, it's really about how they can sequester carbon, all the time, but also there's a lot more for them to do.
Nice. Great. Other ideas? Anybody else got something?
I'll put one out there, David.
Yeah.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm hoping to do a little bit of foreshadowing here. Mine would be Maine leads the charge in adaptation practices to safeguard Maine's economy, public health, and safety.
Yeah. We're out in front. We're doing it.
Yep.
We're doing it for these reasons. Yeah. Great. Those are great. Are there any other ones? Okay. That's great. Well, panel.
I'll try one.
Yeah, please do.
It's kind of the same thing, but I'm condensing. Climate resilience can equal economic resilience. Can equal, does equal economic resilience. Yeah. I think it's shorter.
Right. It's got that core theme that I think came out of the beginning of your panel as well, of this conversation, which is there's so much overlap. between the climate goals, the economic goals, the public health goals, right? And Becca had her nice little Venn diagram to give us that visual of it. But there's real overlap on these things. And that is a very compelling argument as you move forward. Okay, so let's do this. I want to thank you all. Thank you so much, panelists. Everybody, turn your video back on. Let's join in. Okay, so this is our chance for among the council members to have some reflections. I certainly encourage you to speak to the things that are jumping out at you, the things that are landing and are resonating with you, that are important to verbalize right now as you head into this next couple months over the summer. Sandy Buck, go ahead.
It's quick on the trigger. Thanks, David. And again, thanks to all the members of the Climate Council and the working groups. It's just been an amazing process. I've got a few comments and things I'd love to see emphasized or considered at the next step. One, on the natural working lands, that's where my comments really are. Applaud the emphasis on conservation. I couldn't agree more that we need to conserve more land. It's the buffer that's going to save us at the end. More ecological reserves need to be developed. Funding for Land for Maine's future has to happen. We have to consider doing that. I really hope that the Natural Working Lands Group will consider expanding beyond the 10 to 5,000 acre focus on compensation for landowners. I think the greatest potential for sequestering the most carbon exists among the large commercial lands that we have in the northern part of the state. I agree totally that the smaller landowners also can play a role, but I really hope that we will consider ways to compensate large landowners. There are markets that will do this. There are private investments that can do this. There are public-private opportunities. I think we've got to turn over all the rocks and look for those solutions. They're out there. I know it can be done. I also finally wanted to just emphasize the importance of protecting riparian zones. They are areas of rich in biodiversity. They are areas that have high content of carbon sequestration, and they protect those cold water species that are emblematic of our state. Native brook trout habitat, for example. Protected riparian zones will protect our cold water resources and the habitat and wildlife that live in there. And I just finally wanted to call attention. I poured through 75 pages of public comments, which were awesome. Yesterday on Natural Working Lands, so many encouraged, along with other working groups, encouraged bold action. This is our time to act. This is what we were brought together for. This is why Governor Mills and the legislature called this to be. And I just wanted to emphasize this is our time for bold action. And thank you, everybody, for what you're doing.
Thank you, Sandy. Andrew Pershing?
Hi, thanks. And thanks to all the working groups for all the work you and your colleagues have put into this. So I'm going to address the coastal and marine report. And specifically, I really felt like there were some huge gaps in that report and that it really missed the mark in a number of important ways. The one I'm going to emphasize now is that Maine is the steward of the most valuable fishery in the United States. I mean, we have a fishery here that employs 10,000 plus people. It's an iconic part of the state. It's also climate sensitive, right? And it's expected to decline by 50% by 2050. And it's also hugely carbon intensive. So it was surprising that lobster isn't mentioned in the report until page 42. So I think the vulnerability of this fishery and the challenges of adapting it to a low emissions world were completely absent from the report and need to be an important part of what this committee deals with as we go forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Anya?
Hi, thanks everyone for all your fantastic presentations. I have sort of a comment and question for the resilience and community resilience, public health and emergency management working group. Actually, just as we were all talking, I got a news notification that said climate change is tied back to major pregnancy complications, with Black mothers most at risk, according to a study that looked at 32 million US births. And that, in conjunction with Dr. Shaw's talk yesterday, I was just curious about the first strategy, or the third strategy that Judy talked about, how that's going to account for rural and low income and people of color, and how we're going to be able to address those inequities and cracks that are already there. Judy, I liked your paper headline, but I'm wondering if instead of climate resilience equals economic resilience, if we could do climate resilience equals economic resilience equals social resilience. And then I have a second question too, just for the Working Lands Working Group. I'm curious just how much that 75% of sequestered carbon in our forests is being accounted for. It seems fishy to me if we're gonna account for all of that within our own emissions counting, just because obviously we're getting emissions from out of state too, and it disincentivizes us from actually reducing our emissions. So I guess I'm just genuinely curious, or generally curious about that as well.
Thanks. Well, let's take a few more comments and then I'll ask the co-chairs to answer some of these questions. So co-chairs, if you can take some notes as you go, that would be super helpful. Representative Lenny Bloom.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. These are great presentations. Judy, I really think you've hit the mark on so many things with your presentation and with all the things that we need to do for the towns. But you also mentioned regional, and you mentioned that correct time that we want to have a regional approach. And I know that we have these regional planning organizations, but did you reimagine your regional approach in view of what you've learned with all the different towns? Did you come up with a recommendation regarding regionalization, how to approach it? Those are the kind of, I think that's really important. That's a big thing that's missing in this state and it's going to strengthen our ability, as you pointed out, to get funding, et cetera, if we have a strong region approach. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about how far you dug into that, and did you define it further?
Thanks so much. Melissa Law.
Hi there. Thanks so much to our panelists and David for facilitating. I just wanted to highlight one of the things that came up a lot in the Natural and Working Lands group, and Commissioner Beal definitely touched on it, which is the fact that the pandemic has really put a spotlight on a crack in our system, which is our food system, and specifically the industrial food system that has kind of taken control of our food distribution and led to us being heavily reliant on food from away. And I'm a farmer, and so this is really pertinent in my profession, but I just think that it's important to think about how climate change is going to impact our access to food. And I think that if we can try to bring food security into the conversation more, that is a really important piece moving forward.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks so much. Brownie Carson, Senator Brownie Carson, please.
Good morning, David, and thank you. Good morning, everyone. Couple of things. In the Transportation Working Group, as the many of us who are involved in that know, this is about funding. We had real difficulty in figuring out how we address things like the need to improve and expand transit and electrify the system. In the Natural and Working Lands report this morning, there is a clear need articulated by these groups for expanding conservation easements, for management assistance for particularly small landowners, but also perhaps large landowners, land for Maine's future, protecting coastal ecosystems. terms of resiliency, we know we've got coastal infrastructure that is very much at risk, water, sewer, sewage treatment plants, et cetera, and then hardening transportation, perhaps low-lying areas. When there are serious, I believe, climate-related events, hurricanes in particular, I remember being in Vermont right after Irene came through, and the devastation was astounding. We have huge bills, and we A, wonder how to pay for these things, and B, the federal government seems to sort of tack them onto the national data, I guess, and write checks where Congress and the federal government writes checks. I think given the work that needs to be done and the very real costs, Maine would be very well advised to set up a fund so that we can at least start to pay as we go, to pay for things that are important that come from planning processes like this, that would be available as the state or in some cases local match for the federal funds that were noted a few minutes ago, that oftentimes, not every time I think, are available. Whether this is a carbon tax, a fee on carbon-based fuels, whether it's a surcharge. Those of us who earn more and spend more generally consume more, and thus we contribute, I think. I'm not sure what the studies would suggest, but I think it's really important, if we are serious about this, to say we need a funding mechanism. We're going to bite the bullet. We cannot do this on the cheap. We cannot do it by always borrowing, whether it's Land for Maine's Future or for infrastructure. We need to set up a fund that we all pay into, large business, small business, individuals, that has equity built into it so that we are able to do what we are now beginning to talk very seriously about. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Pat Strauch? Sorry, Pat.
Oh, don't worry. It's been a great process, and representing forestry from manufacturing to land issues, I've been frustrated I couldn't be everywhere in all the different committees, because there's so much cross information and ideas that are taking place. So it's been a great process, and it's good to have it all come together here. I was able to participate in the lands working group, and Tom and Amanda, I drove them a little crazy with some of my ideas, but it was a really great experience. With my landowner hat, I do want to say, as I look at all the great ideas about how we deal with land, and in some of the other sections that where it's discussed, keeping in mind Maine is 90% privately owned. We've made great strides in what I call collaborative conservation, and when we start talking about regulatory approaches, I think we owe it to ourselves as a group to make sure we're really vetting some of these regulatory ideas with the landowner community before we get to the legislature with a package. I think that'll go a long ways to finding those creative opportunities to make sure our regulations provide perspective and are science-based. And so I think it's a matter of process, and Judy understands all of this, but that's going to be really important to get buy-in to some of these recommendations when we start. Nothing drives a landowner to be concerned than to hear the word shoreland zoning. So that's an important thing for us just to recognize and to be a part of. And just a quick comment on large landowners in the North Country and down east are really looking at conservation and carbon deals. They're some of the most educated landowners in the area. They have access to both the regulatory and the voluntary markets. And I think our group was interested in promoting that and making sure that they were encouraged to do that, but it looked like they had access, and it was the smaller landowners where there's a real kind of void. And so we were trying to get creative about that. But I can assure you, again, it may be making a decision about your land that lasts forever or lasts for 100 years. So it's a big deal, but it's actively being pursued. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pat. Why don't we take a moment, and there were some specific questions to co-chairs almost in every group. And if anyone needs prompting, I have some of my notes. There was a question about lobster. There was a question on equity. There's a question about regional approach on the planning for Judy. You know, a comment around food security, and then a funding suggestion, and then Pat's comments just now. So maybe I'll turn it over. We could start with the coastal marine, just a moment about lobster. If either one of you want to just take that for a second.
There's not really much to say. It seemed like a bit of a gratuitous comment, frankly. So we can certainly follow up later, but it's all in there. As Andy knows, if he's read all 100 pages and talked to the co-chair of the group who wrote that section of the report.
Okay. Yeah. It's tough space, as we all know. You know, happy to, maybe that's something to take offline as well. Judy, there were some comments up to you about regional approach, some questions around equity as well. Anything you want to circle back on?
Sure, and I guess I'll say that this is a partial answer with respect to equity. All of our recommendations are going to be run through an equity analysis this summer, which I really welcome. But the part that we did, I feel like we did try to address in terms of rural and low-income communities. I'm not so sure that it necessarily directly addressed people of color, though there are, just put that into a low-income category to a certain extent. I think there's maybe language translation services that could be provided there in terms of the technical assistance. But one thing I would point out is we recognize that the lift in rural communities is difficult. They're run essentially by volunteers, and they need assistance. And so then this kind of goes to Representative Bloom's question in not necessarily reimagining regional delivery, but really emphasizing that in order to assess the vulnerabilities in some of these very small towns and integrate that then into climate resilience planning, every single small town does not need to do it. And if you call upon the regional expertise and beef up their abilities with training and additional staff, frankly, you can help small communities assess what their vulnerabilities and responses can be. And the example that I think of that I think helps is pick town of Marshfield. They've got 2 significant culverts that they need to have repaired, and we worked with them on a grant application. That is important for their road network, but the culverts that are repaired also serve habitat interests and regional evacuation routes for the other communities in that region, as well as the first responders who have to use those roads. So there's multiple interconnections between small rural communities and the assistance that you provide them, and when you look at it regionally, that has benefits for low-income communities who rely on those evacuation routes, but also another thing that has come up in my mind that we didn't touch on, and I think we need to add, is we stress the need for training for code enforcement officers and planning boards in terms of planning. But some of the work that I did in Washington County with the first responders tells me that those are volunteer networks. Maybe there's a stipend, okay, on a call, but essentially you're dealing with volunteers who have an enormous and increasing training burden put upon them just by the way rules are changing. And they don't get the stipend when they go to the training, but they must go to the training to stay engaged. And so these are volunteers from all over the state, and especially in rural areas, where they're providing an essential public service. And we need to help them with the training they must have in order for them to function and serve our communities in a regional pattern. They already have fantastic mutual aid connections set up, but I think we can help them with training. And I mean, it's as simple as giving them a stipend to get lunch and pay for their travel time. I suppose in our virtual world, that's a little easier, maybe a good broadband connection. But so there are equity considerations around that we looked at that have to do with recognizing the bar shouldn't be as high when you incentivize those rural communities. Just coordinating regionally and getting your house in order, not redoing your whole comprehensive plan. That's just not necessary. But working collaboratively to identify what your problems and vulnerabilities are and what you will do, you're in the door with those incentives. You don't have to go through the same process or demand the same staff support that, say, the city of Portland needs and has to draw on. So I think that's how we've cut through some of the equity considerations, as well as some of the essential efficiencies that regionalizing this kind of training and support can deal with. But again, I recognize that's a partial answer to what Anya asked, and that through the summer there will be a fuller social vulnerability analysis of what we've recommended.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. And Becca, I know that you wanted to say something about this as well.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, and it's in response to Anya's comments about health equity. Something that I've been chewing on for a little bit, and I don't remember who first said this, but somebody said sometime that all politics is local, and I've been thinking about it as all public health is local, and I think that's been especially true during the pandemic, and in thinking about Maine's local public health system. And several studies have consistently shown that our zip code is a stronger predictor of our health status than our genetic code. And that New York Times article you referenced, I saw that as well. And I haven't read the original study, but I think the findings just underscore that it's about access to all sorts of different services in our environment, whether it is healthcare or if it's safe housing. That study is looking at air pollution, and so thinking about residential proximity to major emitters. So I think when thinking about health equity, I also just kind of want to flag, I guess, the public health services and opportunities that are available in the areas that we're looking at. So that was just what I wanted to add to your question.
Thanks, Becca. Are there other co-chairs who want to weigh in just to help flesh out some thinking around what council members have brought up? Anything else that needs to be said?
Just one point, and I keep picking on poor Ivan Fernandez. I was picking on him by chat as well. I mean, I think that somebody, maybe it was Anya, made a good point about forest sequestration, and I think it's always important to point out that the Climate Council has a couple of overarching goals. We are required to come up with a plan that helps get the state to meet its target of a 45% emissions reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, gross reduction by 2030, and 80% by 2050, at least 80% by 2050. And then the state has a separate goal that was signed by the governor as an executive order to meet carbon neutrality by 2045. And I think it's important to note that sequestration in our forest lands helps us get to that carbon neutrality goal, but sequestration does not reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So we don't offset, like if we doubled the size of our forests, which obviously would be very difficult, or that doesn't in any way contribute to the 45% reduction, because that just has to be gross reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And I think, you know, Ivan Fernandez and his team at UMaine have really done a tremendous job, as we've asked them as part of the science and technical work and part of their own work at UMaine in helping us come up with a 75% number. But I think it's important to note that it's a number that the Science and Technical Committee, as well as DEP, is going to be spending, you know, the next year continuing to hone how we capture that number of the amount of carbon sequestered in Maine. And I think it came up, and it was really exciting to see the coastal and marine strategy around blue carbon and restoration. It's clearly part of our forestry and our ag strategy, and it's, you know, it pops up in other places, but it is, I don't want to call it controversial, but it's an area of evolving understanding and how we sort of categorize these emissions. And it's a process that's happening across the country. As part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, we are working with other states who are wrestling with the same questions. I mean, a state like California is pretty advanced, but even they're interested in working with Maine and Vermont and Oregon and Washington and some of these extremely forested states to help better understand how states are wrestling with these questions. So I just, maybe Ivan wants to add something, but just want to point out that we didn't, there was some skepticism in the chat as well about whether these numbers are real. They are, you know, they're as real as UMaine forestry scientists and others feel they could make them. And I think it's just an important area to understand that we are still having conversations, but we are making these assertions sort of based on science. Just a couple other quick points. I really like the regional approach slash how much Jesse Perkins put in the chat, how much small Maine communities and other Maine communities really have been sort of trying to bootstrap this work as volunteers. And a lot of the state planning office that is now gone, those resources are no longer there for communities. So I think Kathleen likes to point out, you know, we really need incentives. And I think as we think about the strategies, you know, land use changes, how we encourage landowners, how we, you know, make a lot of this Climate Council work happen. A lot of it is about both education and incentives. And I think that is, you know, incentives are get to sort of Brownie's point that everything we're talking about does require funding, and funding conversations are only made more difficult in an economic period like we're in today. But it is incredibly important conversation. So I think I see a lot of things coming together in a really valuable way. And again, thank you all for your work. And I see Kathleen has her finger up.
Yeah, and also Amanda, but Kathleen, why don't you go ahead, and then Amanda, you can jump in on the same point.
Yeah, just two quick points, Hannah. One is that we don't have to do this all at once in the adaptation realm. I remember Judy Gates at DOT when she was with state government talking about incremental adaptation. We won't be able to afford to do it all at once. And then I think we need to look at Maine's past history with some of these big initiatives. And being a land use planner, I'm thinking about the Smart Growth Initiative, which was huge, and 10 state goals and 10 coastal policies that were addressed through municipal comprehensive plans. We funded it well for a while and then didn't fund it at all, and then critiqued it and said it wasn't a success. So I think we need to, however we start, the consistency of the effort over time is really important. So thanks.
Thanks. Amanda, did you want to get in on that?
Yeah, well, I raised my hand originally before Hannah spoke, so she made a lot of really great points about that 75% number, so I'll just leave that there. I think I'll just say one thing to add on to what Melissa Law was talking about in terms of food security. You know, we recognize that, you know, when it comes to prime agricultural soils and soils of statewide importance, that's a finite resource. So when we're thinking about land use, I think there does need to be some real effort around planning and thinking about lands that should be used for certain things, and maybe, you know, highest and best use, but thinking about some of our resource constraints I know we've talked a lot about what a rich natural resource base we have, but we do have constraints. And just to point out too, that this was something, land use and decisions around land use came up, I think, in almost every single committee discussion. And we did have a cross-cutting discussion about that. I think there's a lot more that we need to talk about on that front.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, so I'm not seeing additional hands. Any other quick comments before we shift gears and talk about what's going to happen over the summer and next steps? Anything else? Judy, did you want to say something?
I guess I would just underscore that we saw these presentations, but the detail, there's a whole lot that can answer some of these questions in the detail in the strategies. And so I'm not saying that to say it's all there. I'm saying that please look at it. Are the questions that are being raised now addressed by the detail? And if not, then we're open to hearing more ideas.
That's great. Thanks, Judy. Okay. Great. So why don't we do the following? And thanks everyone for really thoughtful reactions. What I wanted to do now is have Hannah and Jerry talk a little bit about what's coming next, what to expect over the summer and going into your next meeting, which is all the way in September. So I know that there's a slide or two about this. Hannah and or Jerry, I'll turn it over to you and you can walk us through.
Well, hopefully you all spend your summer looking off into the sunset like this and getting a break after an entire spring on Zoom. But we sort of foreshadowed these yesterday and talked a little bit more in detail about the public engagement. But just to want to kind of remind the whole council of the things that are happening between now and our next meeting. So we talked about public engagement and the ways in which we'll do that through a website, through smaller group discussions, through reaching out to people and communities who we want to engage, who might have been left out. It was great to hear this morning a lot of kind of active stakeholder and public engagement happened in the 3 working groups we heard from this morning, but obviously we always and continue want more. So you heard a few sort of people point to it today and yesterday. We have a consulting company called ERG, and they partner with Synapse. They provide economic cost-benefit analysis and modeling research for the Climate Council. And they have assisted the working groups somewhat, but really the bulk of their work is to try to help guide the council in our decision-making to understand the impacts of the proposals that have been put forward and what, as we model them, what it would mean for an emissions reduction in the varying sectors. ERG in particular is doing a report on the cost of doing nothing. And I think Anne talked about it when she showed the Saco wastewater plant, but trying to understand, you know, it's very difficult to model absolutely everything in terms of the cost of doing nothing, but whether it's public health benefits, whether it is challenges for infrastructure, we are getting a cost of doing nothing report. I think that there was a lot of good anecdotes and even the FEMA funding strategy of every $1 invested saves 6 disaster dollars. I think those kind of points will be highlighted in sort of understanding what it would mean if we took no action to prepare the state for climate change. And then the third part of that analysis is sort of a cost and benefit of all the strategies, some of them more than others, but we are really trying to understand from an economic point of view, from a cost point of view, a little bit more detail to build on the incredible work that the groups have done. So this work is happening over the summer. It's work that we will share with all the Climate Council members and publicly as it's completed. But we think it's an important piece of information. Having more data to guide our prioritization is pretty key for the Climate Council. And last, and you've heard about it mentioned a couple times, we're working with the Mitchell Institute at the University of Maine on an equity review. We call it equity audit, equity review, and it's really looking across the strategies that have been recommended and what it means for varying vulnerable populations in Maine. So happy to provide more information on that, but I think they're partnering with us and CBI in terms of how we make sure we engage different communities in the Climate Council and sort of their concern and people's concerns, but also understand, whether it's, rural drivers or tribal populations or new Mainers or people especially vulnerable on the coast, how are we looking at varying populations and people who will be most impacted by climate and most impacted by our strategies. So this is a lot of additional stuff happening on top of the incredible work that's happened all winter and spring. And the idea is to really have the staff, and we'll continue to consult with the working groups, but be able to kind of combine this so we can provide sort of more clear sense as the council comes together in September. And really between September and November, we are in decision-making mode. So we're trying to add more information sort of on top of this work to really help us make decisions. But then by September, we're starting to be in the mode of prioritization or figuring out how these pieces fit together. How do we select some and then throw some out of the boat? How do we figure out clearly the most complicated part, which is often funding? There's a lot of strategies that are important but cost money. I think Kathleen sort of just said it well. It's not every strategy has to happen in month one or year one. So it's also the approach of where do these strategies fit into a timeline. So these are all the kinds of questions that really are now going to be on the Climate Council's plate. So for the 39 of you who are now in the decision-making seat, our job as a staff, and I think as co-chairs and working group members, is to help figure out what more information do we need and how do we put it together so we can make decisions. I would say over the course of the summer, we hope that Climate Council members will really stay in close touch. As we deliver this information to you and try to package it in a way that's manageable, as you take the time to read these working group reports in their full detail, if you have time, we expect a lot of questions that will arise. So creating additional opportunities for one-on-one conversations, for smaller group conversations, for other briefings on these other reports as they come out. That's part of the role of staff. But again, this September 9th meeting is really the start of us coming together to start prioritizing and making decisions. I think our process between September and November will be partially determined by how we can all agree or disagree or the kind of work that's going to be needed to make some final decisions. But Jerry and I will Jerry's luckily an attorney, and so I know he'll have some good advice on how we get to an end result that ultimately DEP, as really the sort of lead agency in terms of, I don't want to call it enforcement, but implementation. Jerry's ultimately responsible for the state meeting its 45% reduction goal. So I'll pass it to Jerry to kind of give I won't say the lawyer's answer, but the really important answer of the person who's accountable for this all working.
Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate that. No pressure at all. The only thing I want to add to what you just said is in terms of the role of the council members over the summer, and you alluded to this, Hannah, I think that we'd love to see you give some thought to those strategies and recommendations that interest you the most, because it's probably not realistic to expect that you're going to become an expert on everything that you've seen introduced to you in the last 2 days, but there are likely some areas that really did intrigue you. And, our expectation is, and our hope is that, council members won't be sitting on their hands over the summer. They will be studying up on these recommendations that we just had a chance to introduce to you in the most general way, given the time constraints we had. And as Judy was saying, it's really just the tip of the iceberg that you got during these presentations. There's a huge body of information and analysis underlying those presentations. So one thing is you can obviously, and we hope you will, review those reports in detail. But also beyond that, we would encourage you to be in touch with the amazing Sarah Curran on Hannah's staff with questions that you would like to pursue. And Sarah can help coordinate getting you in touch with the right people and the right information to kind of help you get the answers you're looking for, and do your own self-study and get whatever tutorials we may be able to provide for you and arrange for. So, as Hannah's saying, the summer is a chance for us to do these three things she just outlined in terms of the public outreach and engagement, the cost-benefit analysis, the equity and audit, take into account the outcome of those processes, to do some repackaging of the strategies that have been outlined so far, and prepare to introduce them to you again in September in their new form. But at the same time, you all can be becoming more expert on those areas that are of most interest to you, and that'll make for I think a much richer experience during the September meeting. So that's what I think would be helpful to bear in mind from the standpoint of a council member, and thinking about what you can be doing over the summer to prepare for September.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Hannah. Okay, so we have, though, a thought exercise for you. And this is something where I'm going to ask everyone, including people who are listening in, working group members, members of the public. I want folks to reflect on these two questions. And it'll be different depending on who you are. But the first question is, individually, what do you want to be doing this summer related to this work to help move it forward? You as an individual, a climate council member, if you're a working group member, like, what is it you want to be doing? And the second question is, you just saw what the plan is for the summer. In your opinion, what would be most helpful for the Climate Council to have a very successful September meeting? Let's just take a moment or two of silence. Let's think about this for a second. And then if you're a Climate Council member, go ahead and write in some ideas on this sheet about what you individually would like to do over the summer to advance this work, and what do you think really is going to be most helpful to have a really great, productive meeting in September. Working group members, I'm talking to you now. Folks in the audience who are working group members, you're going to have an email from Cassie, literally as we speak, with a very similar document for you. So if you're a working group member listening to all this, go into your email, open up that doc, and you can start to add in the respective working group docs, the very same answers to these questions. So you'll find that in your email. And I'm just going to give folks a moment to think, right? I don't mind if it's a couple moments of silence here while folks are thinking. I think it's important while this is all fresh in your minds to just reflect for a moment before you forget. So let's just take a few moments, let those documents populate. If you are a member of the public and you are listening in, we'd welcome you to include this in any comment that you want to provide to the Climate Council via the website. So if there's things that you want to do, or things that you could do in collaboration with Hannah Pingree's team, this is a great opportunity to include that in the comments that you provide through the portal. Let's just take a moment and let folks think, and then we'll finish up our day. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. So as a way of summarizing, we wanted to do just a very short exercise here to help articulate how we're leaving these 2 days of meetings. We're going to be constructing a cloud of words, a word cloud, and we're going to ask you the following question. For everybody listening in addition to the Climate Council members, really think about it. What are words or a short phrase that have stuck with you and inspire you, right? We want to pull on the things that motivate us, so we can just watch as our inspiration unfolds in front of us. some words, a short phrase. And this will be updating as people are clicking in their words.
I like that the word possible is sticking in there.
Yeah, it's holding strong. Possible is definitely holding strong. And obviously, there's a big word in the middle. Great. So you can see how this is moving here. And it'll continue to update as more of the Climate Council members put in. There's some really good messages coming across from this word cloud. All right, let's just give it one more second. If you haven't dropped in what you want to drop in, now's the time, and then we'll just hold it off for a second and let it sit for a moment. We can look at it. Let's give it another 30 seconds if anybody else on the Climate Council has not yet added words in there. Okay, that's great. All right, well, Hannah, I love the fact, possible's still there. Resilience is loud and proud, right? Equity and change and climate, economic, these are words that inspire us and move us forward. I wonder, Hannah and Jerry, if there's any reflection you have on seeing these words on the screen.
Dr. Shaw is very inspiring.
Yeah. I'm looking at the impossible versus the possible on this thing. I mean, I think resilience being the biggest word is a good one. And I know even among the work groups, there's been debate about how do we use the word resilience, because it's like mitigation. We use it in different ways, but I think resilience can be defined in a lot of ways, but it really is crucial for all of our work. We're trying to create a sustainable state, help the resilience, and we talked about economic resilience, clearly climate resilience, and a lot of the strategies speak to that. And ultimately, our work to reduce our carbon emissions and try to be part of a solution to reduce the climate crisis is about resilience for Maine people and Maine communities. So I'm glad that word rose to the top.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
okay.
And I would just add, David, that, as Sandy was saying, I think the ideas can and should be bold, but as others have noted, making important progress can be done incrementally. And in many of the strategies, I think that's where we'll see some progress, is not in dramatic, headline grabbing actions, but in very mundane work performed by planners and other professionals who are doing all sorts of good things on a smaller scale.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone. And one of the ways I want to thank everyone is to give you about 20 minutes of your day back. So if Jerry and Hannah are okay with that, I think what we should do is celebrate the fact that we just had 2 mornings of very powerful interaction and powerful presentations. And as a nice, sort of making good on commitments, I wonder, Cassie, if you could repost in the chat that the new website is now, as of 10 minutes ago, officially launched. And so it will be increasingly populated with content and interactivity in the coming weeks. And as mentioned yesterday, it's one of the key backbones of a public outreach strategy that will involve targeted work based in part on your suggestions yesterday. If you remember the public listening, there's even a form right there on that new website to request that the Climate Council come to you and speak and have a conversation with your groups, your community organization, a group of folks. And so we encourage you to contact the Climate Council and Hannah Pingree team to do that over the summer. So I think without further ado, I would say thank you. Hannah and Jerry, anything else that you would want to add before we sign off here today?
No, I just would say, David, thank you for pointing out the website. I think we've seen a lot of questions and comments in the chat about when will presentations be available, and will we be able to see it online. And our plan is to populate that website with a lot of what happened in the last 2 days, sharing information in varying forms. Everyone wants Dr. Shaw's speech in a shortened format, so we'll make sure to get that up as soon as we have it. That website will continue to evolve until early July, when we'll really launch the public engagement portion of it. So it's in part 1, but it will continue to grow in the next couple of weeks. And I just want to also, Ken Coburn put it in the chat, but huge thanks to David and Sophia and Cassie and Sarah and my whole team to help sort of pull off these 2 days. I did say it's great to see everybody at the Augusta Civic Center, but this format is cheaper and worked really well. And I know folks can hopefully run outside and enjoy the outdoors, at least on their lunch break. So huge thank you to the team who helped pull this off.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to everyone who really pulled through. 2 3-hour meetings back to back is brutal. Thanks for being there with us. And we look forward to interacting with you over the summer, and we'll see you on the 9th of September. All right. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care. All the best.